Congruent figures. Objectives: to recognize congruent figures and their corresponding parts. Congruent figures, it says, definition, congruent polygons have congruent corresponding parts, their matching sides and angles. When you name congruent polygons, you must list the corresponding vertices in the same order. So notice here, they have two figures and they're saying ABCD is congruent to EFGH. And notice that the order matters because AB is congruent to EF. And notice that A matches up with E, B matches up with F, C with G, and D with H. And whenever you have a figure, you should have as many sides and angles as the figure has. So like if we have a quadrilateral, we're going to have 4 sides, 4 angles. We have a triangle, we have 3 sides, 3 angles that we're going to be matching up. But the order does matter. Why do we need all sides and angles when proving triangles congruent or proving any figure congruent? Well, okay, I need you to focus on the inside square here. If someone gave you this as a square and they said, okay, all 4 sides are equal. If I only gave you 4 of the sides to prove the triangle or the figures are congruent, would someone else possibly make something like this? Now looking at the 4-sided figure on the inside, the purple figure, is that still a square? Well, no, that's a rhombus. And so that's why we need to make sure that we have all corresponding sides and angles are congruent to each other, because it's the difference between a square and a rhombus. Example 1. It says if triangle WYS is congruent to triangle MKV, what are the corresponding parts? Well, you could draw this out, or we know that W matches up with M. So I know that angle W is congruent to angle M. Angle Y is congruent to angle K. And S would be congruent to V. There's my 3 angles. Now I need my 3 sides. So I'm looking at this as WY would be congruent to MK because they correspond to the same location. And then I can say YS is congruent to KV. And I can say that WS is congruent to MV. Now if you need to, you can draw 2 triangles because they weren't provided. Let's see, WYS and MKV. And you could mark, okay, W is congruent to M, Y is congruent to K, and S is congruent to V. You could draw this, and so that way you can make sure you have all your sides correctly, or you can look at how it was labeled here. It's up to you, but I do want to see some kind of matching when you're doing your Math Excel. Example 2, it says, suppose that triangle WYS is congruent to triangle MKV. If the measure of angle W is 62 and the measure of angle Y is 35, what is the measure of angle V? Explain. Okay, well, if I know W and Y, that means I also know M and K because they're congruent to each other. And if they're congruent to each other, that means that I know that, let me draw my triangle, MKV, that M is congruent to W, so this is 62. K is congruent to W or Y, so I get 35. And so now I'm just looking for V. So I can take 180 minus 62 minus 35, and I get, so I'm going to write this down so you can see it, 180 minus 35 minus 62, and this is going to equal angle V, which equals 83. So we're using stuff from last chapter on knowing that there's 180 degrees in a triangle, but we're putting this into a new context of having congruent figures. Example 3. I accidentally copied the wrong thing in, so you have to exit out what it says. It has the picture's right, but the question's wrong. It says, it should say, is triangle ABD congruent to triangle CBD? Justify your answer. Okay, we know that AB is congruent to DC because it's given. We know that BD right here would be congruent to itself by the reflexive property. But we don't have any angles, and we don't have the third side. So we would have to say no. We do not know all angles and sides. Do not know all corresponding angles and sides. Third angle theorem. If two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then the third angles are congruent. That just means if we are given two angles of a triangle, we can find the third angle. This is basically what it's saying. Okay, it says example 4. It says given that angle A is congruent to angle D, AE is congruent to DC, and EB is congruent to CB, and BA is congruent to BD. They want us to prove that the triangles are congruent. So we're going to start off with our given. So statements, reasons. So I'm going to say angle A is congruent to angle D, AE is congruent to DC, EB is congruent to CB, and BA is congruent to BD. That was given. Okay, so I have three sides, but they only give me one angle. But I also know another angle. I know this angle is congruent to this angle because of vertical angles. So I can say angle ABE is congruent to angle CBD because of vertical angles. Okay, now the nice thing is now I don't have to go through and prove that E is congruent to C. I can, and make a long proof, I can say now because of the third angle theorem, I can say angle E is congruent to angle C by the third angle theorem. Okay, and then I can say that triangle AEB is congruent to triangle DCB because all corresponding sides and angles are congruent. Lesson check. Please try the lesson check before you come to class. Thanks.